Everyone, this is Jotto, and welcome to a very special video that me and Moon are doing. This has been a project that a lot of people from Managrind have been involved in over the past couple months, on and off, as we've spent some time on this and then took a bit of a break and then went back to do some more of it. But recently it's been me and Moon who've done a lot of the balancing and such to this actual project, and Shiv also contributed a little bit on some of the cards. And he'd kill me if I didn't say that. So anyway, so say hi, Moon.
Hello everyone, today with webcam, finally works again. And yeah, pretty excited to go through all the cards. I mean, we worked basically months on it, but we had like a break between it, so yeah, pretty good.
Yep, there is actually a reason for the Iron Beak Owl there, by the way. It's not just there. I can use it for people's webcams, which is very handy. But before we start, there's a couple of things I want to say about this. First of all, is this particular set, it's not as flashy as a lot of the other ones where they have crazy cards with just ridiculous effects and everything. When we designed this set, we weren't trying to come up with a set which was just people like say, oh my god, that looks amazing. We were trying to come up with a set that fit two criteria. One, it was actually balanced, and two, Blizzard could actually implement it. Yeah, with the class synergies.
And class synergies, yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get to the first card, but the main thing about these sets is that so many people put really complicated mechanics into it, and they can't implement those kinds of mechanics. Like, not in Hearthstone. They just can't do it. So the aim is to try and get a decent keyword, or some simple to understand mechanics, maybe one or two interesting cards, and they'll actually implement something like that. They won't just sort of skim over it and say, yeah, no. Which is what was happening with a lot of the suggestions from other Death Knight sets. That, and they were either underpowered as hell, or completely broken. So yeah, and the last thing, before we move on, is that we have actually playtested this on the old simulator we used to use from pre-beta, long time ago.
Named Cockatrice.
Yep, we played on
how you wanna
Cockatrice, who cares? Anyway, we played on Cockatrice for months before the actual beta came out, and that's what we were playing Hearthstone on. And so we thought, wait a second, we can actually make cards and imprint them into Cockatrice. So we did, and we playtested it, and we made a lot of different balance decisions. And we tried it out again, and actually a lot of it was really like solid. We were kind of impressed with how we'd managed to balance some of the cards, even though some of them were really, really, really broken when they first were made.
Yeah, we will mention like some of them, how they were first. We go through the cards.
Yeah. Anyway, so without
that could be
further ado, let's get started, shall we? First card, the Zombie. Now,
maybe we should, if I may interrupt you, maybe we should start with the hero ability at first.
Yeah, I was actually going to explain that when we came to Drain, but probably a good thing to do first. So this gives me an opportunity to actually discuss the mechanic we came up with. Well, there's two. There's two class mechanics. One is Undead, which is kind of like beasts, so to speak. There's beast synergies, but not all the same synergies. It's much more undead themed than just smash them in the face. But the other thing is a mechanic called Drain. Now, Drain is the keyword for Death Knight, and is also in the hero power, where the hero power is Drain 1, which means that your opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So it's sort of like Steady Shot, but it's half the damage, but you gain 1 damage back as well. It doesn't get affected by spell damage, obviously, because it's a hero power, but it does interact with some of the cards, kind of like the way the Priest Heal does.
Yeah, and it's a bit worse than the Druid hero power at full HP, but then it gets through taunt, like it gets around taunt, and it does not interact with board, so it balances it out a bit, and it has like class synergy in it, which we will see in the class cards.
Drain, we found that Drain got much more powerful the more you had. So while the hero ability itself is fairly weak, the fact that you have so much of it, it really does stack up over the entire game. So anyway, back to the zombie. Now, every single class has a basic minion, so to speak. It doesn't necessarily have to be basic rarity, but it's just the cheap minion, usually 1 mana or 2 mana, that just doesn't have that sort of crazy of an ability on it. So we did a 1 mana 2/1 undead, so it synergizes with some of the other stuff, and Death Rattle is Drain. So when it dies, you gain 1 life, your opponent loses 1 life. It's kind of like Lepergnome.
Right, that's what I wanted to say. It's kind of like Lepergnome. It's a bit stronger because it is an undead, and the drain effect will be really relevant when we come to cards like Pillar of Blight later on.
Yeah.
And it's also a 1 mana minion. Like it's pretty good days in the fast meta game to have low mana drops, so you can actually interact with the board really early. I really like this card. It
Yeah.
made it basically in all my Death Knight decks when we played it in Cockatrice.
Yeah, I was less of a fan of the card. I played a bit of a slower deck, but you could definitely play a much faster deck with some of the aggro stuff, even though the actual class mechanic itself is fairly slow paced. But anyway, on to the second card. Now, this was a mix between me wanting to put a 2 mana silence into the deck and Moon coming up with 1/2 stats.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, Banshee is.
And then we found
super powerful.
a good name for it, Banshee, because
This-
it's like.
This card was so good. Like it's
Yeah.
it's a flipped Iron Beak Owl, literally flipped. Everything on the card is flipped. It has the stats flipped. Even it's not a beast, it's an undead.
It's an undead, right?
So it is the reverse Iron Beak Owl.
It's really good.
It's really good. Yeah, and it kind of felt like the old Novice Engineer, to be honest, in terms of utility.
Yep.
It was just really powerful. It would clean out a lot of your draws. You could just deal with things like Nat Pagel. Like on turn 2, deal with a Nat Pagel that doesn't die straight to hero power. It's a bit of a weird thing to play with, but it was way more powerful than we first thought it would be. And also the fact that it's basic. This is because silence should be basic, because people need to play with silence straight away. I don't understand why silence is common and rare. Just seems weird.
Seems weird, yeah. People should have an answer to weird buffed up minions or something like that.
Yeah, but this was super strong, and the undead synergies come in later, especially with some of the spells. But anyway, on to, as we referenced earlier, Pillar of Blight. Besides the unhappy totem art, Pillar of Blight is the Northshire Cleric. It's like Northshire Cleric meets Nat Pagel.
Yeah, kind of.
And this is why we referenced Zombie earlier, because it says whenever you drain, draw a card. Now, Zombie, when it dies, drains, so you turn it into a loot hoarder, essentially, with an offensive potential. And your hero power also drains, so you can just go Pillar of Blight, draw. So,
which is really good. Like 4 mana, you have a 0/4, which is not too bad, and you draw a card.
Yep, exactly. Now,
and it also made to some of the changes, right? Like we made some changes to the card.
That's what I was gonna say. Was that originally this was a 0/3 for 1. Now we thought, well, Northshire Cleric isn't overpowered. Maybe Pillar of Blight will be fine. And then we realized that you had no restrictions. And also that a lot of the cards in the deck have healing potential, essentially, through the drain, if you want to compare it to Northshire Cleric. So we ended up with this weird situation where you'd just play a minion and then draw a card. It was too good at 1 mana.
It felt too good for 1 mana, yeah.
Yeah, we actually changed we changed the card when Moon won a game, essentially, by going turn 1 Pillar of Blight Zombie. And you just couldn't beat it, because it was like loot hoarder, and it was just a loot hoarder and a Northshire Cleric on turn 1. It was just ridiculous.
And in best case, you draw 2 cards the next turn, because you sacrifice your zombie, and then you drain with your hero power. It was just too good.
Yep, agreed. Anyway, moving on to a card which I designed fully. We have cards which both of us contributed a lot to, a couple which Moon made completely, and this is one of the ones I made completely. Now,
and a couple that other Mana Grand members made as well.
yeah, although some of
Don't
those
forget to mention that.
some of those actually petered out. Although there is one which is actually
Yeah.
named after one of them, which we will see later. Anyway, Corpse Crawler, 3 mana 2/2 undead. Whenever a minion dies, drain 1, and Death Rattle, drain 1. It's the drain machine. It will always drain 1, essentially, is the point behind this thing. But then you can play it onto a full board later on and trade a bunch, especially in Arena. This would be crazy. You just play it, trade all of your stuff. They lose 8 life. Like, it would be pretty ridiculous. And no, it says minion, not friendly minion. That was deliberate. That's why the stats are so bad. But this was very good in testing, but only if it wasn't answered. Like, I had this on the board once for 3 turns because he didn't have an answer to it, and I just won the game.
Yep, like if you have it behind the taunt or something.
It's like flesh
it might, yeah. At first, it might seem a bit of a complicated card, but in fact, it learns the drain mechanic. That's why you put it as a basic, right,
yeah.
Joe?
It's one of those introductory cards to drain, where it looks complicated, but that's only because the way wording works in Hearthstone. What it actually is whenever anything dies, your opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1.
Right, and when the minion itself dies, it's also drain 1.
Exactly. It's just
like on top of it.
If anything dies, drain. That was the principle behind this, and it worked out fairly well in the end.
Yeah, and you can play it even like a cult master. Like you have a couple minions, you play it like a cult master, you drop the Corpse Crawler, and then you suddenly trade your minions, gain some health, your opponent loses some health.
This
it's
was
really
Pillar
good
of
card.
Blight. Like, you could 2-card combo this with Pillar of Blight on turn 5.
Yeah, so I can see this in a token deck.
Yeah, it'd be really good in a token deck. Now, speaking of a token minion, onto Fellwalker. Now, Fellwalker is reverse Harvest Golem, so to speak. Well, kind of. It's a little bit weaker, arguably, on the first one, but then the token it summons is stronger. And it's also undead, so it makes up for it. So it's a 3/2 for 3, so the Harvest Golem sort of essential stat total. And when it dies, it summons a 2/2. Now, the 2/2 is a Walking Corpse, which is also an undead.
Yep.
Now, the interesting thing about this is that it just gives you something that can stay on the board early game, and especially for some of your spells, you need an undead enabler for a lot of them to make them good. So we added this just to give a little bit of sustained power to some of the earlier tempoed Death Knight decks as opposed to some of the later control-y ones.
Yeah, and the two health is not irrelevant on this. Like it dies to Holy Light, Holy Smite, to Arcane Shot, to Claw. Dies to a lot of things, but that's because the token is a bit stronger and doesn't die to hero power.
Yeah, people do underestimate the 3 health on Harvest Golem. I think a bit too much. Like 2/3 is better than 3/2 when it comes to it having extra Death Rattle stuff on it.
Yep.
So anyway, on to possibly the most deceptively balanced. Like, it looks overpowered. It really does. And you have to believe us, this thing is not overpowered. In fact, we buffed it.
We buffed it, yeah.
Like, it was terrible, and we buffed it. Okay, so the way this works, 3 mana 3/2 cannot be damaged by minions. That includes battle cries, death rattles, any abilities of any kind, attacks, nothing. You play this, your opponent's minions shut up. That's what this thing was designed to do. Now, the reason it's epic is because Arena is a thing. But yeah, we did not want this to be common in Arena. But the other reason this is a card, it originally was 4 mana. I think it was actually 5 mana at one point. It was 5 mana.
I think it was 4.
It was like 5 mana 3/3, I think, and then we made it into a
Really?
4 mana 2/2, and then a 3 mana 2/2, and then a 3 mana 3/2. This got buffed so many times.
Yeah.
It was just bad.
It's a bit like the flying mechanic in Magic.
A little bit, yeah, but it also works on combat.
Yeah.
Originally, this also went past Taunt. It doesn't anymore, and the only reason for that wasn't because it was overpowered, but because it was confusing. So we decided to take that away from it. It doesn't bypass taunt anymore. It just doesn't get damaged by minions. Now, this looks like it'd be almost impossible to kill, but then the reason this card was created in the first place was the idea was Fairy Dragon punishes decks that rely too much on spells. Gargoyle is supposed to punish decks that run the standard 2 Wrath, 2 Swipe, 2 Innervate, and all minions.
Yep.
Like, and I'm using Druid as an example because Druid does it the worst out of all of them. But there's other ones like the Warlock aggro decks playing 2 Soulfires. And that was it. That was like it. 2 Soulfires, power overwhelming, nothing else.
Mm.
And some of the mage decks just playing Frostball. It just, so many people got really, really greedy on the minions, so we thought, well, if you added this card in, they couldn't just go all out on minions, which is what we were trying to avoid.
Yeah. Imagine this card in like a buff up deck. If you give this card some buffs, if it like remains on board, this can return into a win condition itself.
Yeah, essentially, but you can still polymorph it.
Yep.
You can't, like, you can even Tinkmaster it, because we removed the cannot be affected by, which is what it originally was. You just can't damage it. So, you can still Tinkmaster it, silence it, things like that. Like, it's not immune to things like that anymore, which it used to be, but it was just really confusing. So we changed it into cannot be damaged, and we're actually pretty happy with the card and how it came out.
Yeah, it's still a really good card.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to the obligatory tribal card. Yeah, this is Necromancer. This is 2/3 for 3, and the reason it's 2/3, not 3/3, is because it says friendly on there. Not all undead, like Murloc War Leader does with Murlocs. So this does not ever benefit your opponent's stuff. And keep in mind, it says friendly. So while the actual Necromancer itself is undead, it does not debuff itself. Another thing which I have seen on some other people with card designs. Originally, this was actually, it was just like class human or just not undead, and it would give all undead the buff. But then we realized that we had a bit of a shortage on value undead creatures to be run, and having a tribal undead creature that wasn't undead and didn't benefit from anything was a little sketchy, so to speak.
I'm actually not completely sure if we need to change the wording on it. Maybe give other friendly undead minions. I have to look up some other cards. I'm not sure.
I think it might be other friendly, but anyway, the point of this is that it does not buff itself. I may have got the templating wrong there. It is possible. The Hearthstone templating is actually really difficult to follow. I was incredibly surprised. Like, some stuff is capitalized, some stuff isn't, and there's a bunch of weird wording. But it's
the good thing about this card is, the good thing is it's not a battle cry. It's an aura effect, so it can be silenced still. And if it remains on your board, you may benefit out of it a lot. So I really like this card.
Yeah, and we changed it to undead to give a couple of extra energies. Onto a card that looks way worse than it is. Skeletal Warlord, 4 mana 3/5. So the Sen'jin or Violet Teacher stats. It's kind of in between of Sen'jin and Violet Teacher.
Right.
Because whenever Skeletal Warlord destroys a minion, so it has to attack it, you summon a 2/1 skeleton, and there's the skeleton. But anyway, so this is also undead because we wanted pretty much most of them, although not all the minions are undead. For example, Gargoyle and Pillar Blight are not. But yeah, this was designed to be the backbone of a lot of these mid-rangey undead-based decks. And this was surprisingly very, very good. We didn't think it would be that good. We thought it would die instantly. But when we played with it, it was getting 1, maybe 2 tokens per play. It was pretty decent. I was very surprised.
I think this card, it looked a bit underwhelming at first, but in playtesting, it was sometimes the most valuable card that some of us played.
Sometimes, yeah, it was really surprising. It was like Sen'jin.
Sen'jin
is way more powerful than he looks.
Yep.
It's that kind of effect. Even like Violet Teacher's been seeing some play recently as well. But this was essentially aggressive based Violet Teacher. Okay, onto a card which was inspired by Shiv, but not directly designed by. There's another card that was directly designed by him further down here. But Plaguebringer. This is another card which we buffed a lot. It was a 5 mana 1/7, and then a 4 mana 1/6, and then a 4 mana 2/6. And it's also
It
not
needed
undead.
some buffs.
Yeah, it needs
That's
some
for
buffs.
sure.
It's also not undead. But the effect looks absurd at first. It really does look insane. All damage dealt to Plaguebringer is dealt to your opponent. So when it will take 6 damage and die, and then they'll take 6. But there's two things you got to account for why this isn't completely insane. First of all is that the tempo of Death Knight on its own is actually much slower than it looks. So far you've just seen all the more aggressive cards, but even then they're not super aggressive. They're a bit more defensive overall. So it doesn't have the reach to really pressure without a lot of charge cards. And at that point you wouldn't play Plaguebringer anyway, because this is just like a weird Leroy Jenkins.
Yeah.
At that point, yeah. And the other thing is you can't buff its health. The only way of buffing its health is using neutral cards. There really aren't any ways of making this stronger. Originally, we did have a card called Bone Armor, which gave 2 health, but that was taken out in favor of a more offensive version, so to speak.
And you can still silence it. It's also a fair point.
Yeah, you can silence it, and nice Oasis Snapjaw. Yeah, it's really way weaker than it looks. The effect would be insane if it was in something like Hunter, but it's not. And that is why this card is actually balanced.
It's a bit like eye on an eye on the card itself, if you think about it.
A little bit, yeah. But anyway, the actual card is decent. It's not overpowered, even though it looks like it. Now, this was a card which was extremely good. Just extremely good.
Yep.
And I think I missed a templating thing. Yes, I did. Even in a video with both of us working on it, I made a typo.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, this is supposed to be undead. Like, little box here is supposed to be undead. Anyway, obligatory typo is obligatory. But yeah, this is supposed to be undead as actual sort of minion type. But the actual card is very strong. It was one of the first cards we came up with, actually, because the first thing we wanted to do was make a good 5-drop that was class specific. Because there really aren't that many good neutral 5-drops. So you really
and also not that many good class 5 drops, if you think about it.
Like Druid of the Claw.
There's like Druid of the Claw, yeah. And then
maybe Doomguard, arguably. Blizzard hates 5-drops. And anyway, I thought Druid of the Claw cost 3 mana. Moving on. Undead Horror was one of the most stable cards we actually played with. It did what it was supposed to. The Drain 1 actually mattered a lot more than you'd think it would. And the fact that it had Taunt would just stop certain decks straight away. And it was too slow, so you couldn't just capitalize it with things like Necromancer to make it into a 5/6, for example. It was a bit too slow for that kind of thing. You needed to play it in some of the slower decks as opposed to some of the really fast aggro decks. Because it's not like Druid of the Claw. You don't have, the attacking charge option. But this card was very good. It was one of the better cards in the entire set, I think.
I think it was almost in every deck that we played tested with.
I think I cut down to 1 copy later on, but that's because I was running some of the higher cost stuff and I had to lower my curve a bit. But the actual card itself was pretty good. It kind of reminded me of Druid of the Claw, although not quite as that. It's not that insane, but it reminded me of Druid of the Claw.
It fits kind of the same role, right?
Yeah.
Because most of the time you play the Druid as a taunt, unless you have like some killing reach in hand, or you're really afraid of a Black Knight and you have like no answer to a following Black Knight, then okay. But
yeah, it felt like Druid of the Claw, so to speak, just without the versatility. Okay. On to Crypt Fiend. The art is kind of weird, but we did our best with that one. Crypt Fiend is the fire elemental, so to speak, of the class, although you can't target minions. Now, this pretty much proved that 2 drain is not twice as good as 1 drain. It's about 3 or 4 times as good as 1 drain.
Right.
It did a lot. This was one of the first
You
cards.
would be surprised, yeah.
I think this was the first card we had 2 drain on, and we played with it, and we were like, no, 2 drain is only going on things with like high costs.
Yep.
Did not want more than 1 drain at a time at lower costs, because you play it and it's a 4 life swing, and you gain a 6 attack creature that then triggers all of your spells that benefit from undead. Like, it was pretty ridiculous in terms of the actual card. It wasn't overpowered, and the entire reason it wasn't overpowered was because we made sure that it didn't do the fire elemental thing and be a 6/5.
Right.
Yeah, we designed this from actually straight away. I think this was the only card that was never changed.
It's way easier to kill.
Yeah, we never changed this. I think we just made it a like,
yeah, I think we
6/4.
Yeah, we never changed it.
Balanced. Like, we didn't even play it in every single deck. We played it in some decks, some of the stoolier ones. It wasn't like fire elemental where it was everywhere. And it was actually pretty well balanced. We were kind of surprised with how powerful that drain was, because the actual stats are not that good for a 6-drop. But the drain was better than it looked. The actual mechanic is fairly powerful on its own. And
I like it.
yeah, 4 life swing. Anything else to add?
Nope.
Okay. Time to move on to another card that was changed a million times. You'll hear that a lot. But anyway, Lich. Now, this was Nick Demon's, I think, concept.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, the ability came from me, but the actual stats and cost and everything and the name came from Nick. We just needed to figure out what to put on it. But this used to be a 7 mana 4/7, and it was a little too slow. It was just too slow, wasn't good enough. So we moved it back a bit. And this is very good.
Yeah, it's a bit like Baron Geddon. You could compare it a little bit to him.
Yeah.
Comes a turn earlier. Is not as vulnerable as Baron Geddon, because Baron Geddon can just get big game hunted.
Or Starfired.
Or Starfired, right? Like 6 health is really relevant. We have seen this on Druid of the Claws and on Water Elementals. They are so hard to remove sometimes.
Doesn't have drawback is another thing.
Right.
But it has an upside.
Drawback.
This used to be epic, actually. The only reason it's not epic is because we decided to switch it with one of the weapons, because it was more flavorful to have that as an actual epic. But this card was one of those things where I never put 2 in my deck, ever. But because I was, weirdly enough, playing the slower decks out of the 2 of us, which never tends to happen until recently, actually. Because up until recently, since we did the whole Death Knight thing, and we both started playing Soulforge a bit more, and also switching, even after like 2 patches ago in Hearthstone, I remember you used to be more of a control player, and then we both ended up playing aggro all the time.
Yep.
It's less boring, but sorry, control players. But this was actually something I did play in my mid-range decks that I was playing. Didn't really play a full control one at any point, but I did play a lot of mid-range variants, and this was a one-of. I didn't play more than one ever, but I did play one, and it was very good when I drew it. But I did try to, and you just drew it too much. But having one as a tech card, it kind of reminded me of Black Knight. You'd think having one is not enough, but it really is. Like,
yep.
you draw it when you need it, and it was surprisingly powerful. Like, what did you think?
I really
of it
like this
overall?
card. I think I would actually even try playing 2, because the 6 health is just not irrelevant. It's still a good 6 drop.
So hard to kill.
And it has no drawback. Other than
Yeah.
it's a little slow, but it's not too slow, because it does something on your turn, like at the end of your turn. So I think I would maybe even play 2.
Yeah, maybe.
I didn't try him as much though.
I think I played 2 Crypt Fiend and 1 Lich.
Okay.
When I did it, or 1 Crypt Fiend, 1 Lich. It was an interesting split to make. But anyway, on to the last minion. the legendary.
The class legendary.
Now, this is non-undead characters, and we would have been able to show this if we could make a hero portrait, but both of us suck at making hero portraits, so we didn't. But the actual hero itself is classified as undead, and because it doesn't like affect any of the spells, because you need like an undead minion, but it does affect one situation, which is with this guy, where Battlecry Barongeddon effect that does not affect undead.
Yep.
This was
So
unbelievably
mainly
strong.
not your board.
This
There
was
might be some minions on your field, but mainly not your board. And also not
Actually,
your hero.
even in the mirror match, this was decent.
Yeah.
Like, I was very surprised. I thought this would be dead in the mirror match, but killing things like Pillar of Blights and
Gargoyle?
Actually, no. It used to be able to kill
No?
Gargoyle, but we changed Gargoyle twice. Now it wouldn't, because it
Oh,
doesn't
okay.
get damaged. But it would
Doesn't
kill
get,
Pillar.
oh yeah, it doesn't get damage. Just
Pillar
right.
of Blights. I used to use it to kill Necromancers before that was undead. Things like that. It was actually surprisingly good because Pillar of Blight was really difficult to deal with in the mirror match, and this would actually deal with it along with Lich. And it was just surprisingly powerful. I just couldn't understand why, considering pretty much all the targets were dead. But then it would kill the neutral stuff you would use, like Loot Hoarders and Harvest Golems and like Black Knight and Sylvanas and such, which originally was undead, but we decided not to because that would be weird and would cause a lot of issues.
Imagine if you play this card with a Barongeddon together. Like you play Barongeddon, he removes Barongeddon, and he suddenly gets another Barongeddon on the board the turn after.
Now, the reason we actually didn't keep Sylvanas and Black Knight and such as undead, even though they are technically undead, was balance reasons. Because we have a certain draw spell later on which required you to sacrifice an undead minion. And as you can think about, sacrificing the Sylvanas for free and drawing cards was not particularly balanced.
Yep.
So we removed that interaction fairly quickly. The other thing is it made it less confusing with Instructor of Vesuvius, because unless you were against a Death Knight, they did not have undead creatures, which would be very confusing to play with. So we ended up removing the undead classification on pretty much every single neutral card. The other one that we had was Flesh Eating Ghoul. So, but yeah, this card was surprisingly powerful. Did not expect it to be this strong, to be honest.
Me neither. Like 8 mana is not irrelevant. Not all class legendaries, but some of them cost 8 mana. So
We have like
kind of fits the role.
Grom Tyrion. This actually felt like the undead Tyrion. Like
Kind of.
there was counters to it, but the effect was less powerful, but it was pretty swinging.
Yep.
Now, onto Death Grip. Well, onto the spells first of all. Onto Death Grip. Now, if you notice, the art is actually a whited out version of Bane of Doom, if I recall.
Yeah, correct.
There's actually a lot of whited out versions of cards which actually look really good. But anyway, Death Grip. This is one of the few cantrip sort of spells that we actually put into Death Knight to supplement some of the draw power besides Pillar, because we didn't want a priest situation where they're reliant on one card.
Yeah.
But this is give a minion
Northshire
taunt.
Cleric.
Northshire Cleric, yeah. Give a minion taunt and draw a card. This was hilarious with Black Knight.
Yeah, it was really good.
It was really funny because it says a minion, as in enemy minion as well. So
Still not overpowered, I feel, because druids can do the same, kind of.
not
They
to
don't draw a
mention,
card out of it.
you
but-
can't just cantrip out of this. Like if they don't have any creatures and you don't have any creatures and you top deck Death Grip, you feel horrible. You can't
Right.
target anything. So you actually need to target to actually draw a card. But this was interesting to say the least. It helped a lot with getting past taunt, which sounds hilarious considering it gives.
And it
taunt.
helps with early aggro against early aggro decks where you need the taunts early.
One of my
So you can
favorite
give
uses
your
was against Shaman, against the taunt totems,
Oh.
getting the Flame Tongue up or getting the Unbound Elemental up from behind the Feral Spirits.
yeah,
Like there's a reason it's called Death Grip.
right.
You're supposed to pull something towards the front. And you could also use it on your own stuff to protect your life total a bit.
Imagine this on a gargoyle. They just run into a
I
wall.
think we actually did that at one point.
Look at all the murlocs, they just run into a wall.
Turn 4, gargoyle.
They have
death
to
grip.
soul fire the gargoyle. Or demon fire. Some
Or
warlock
like Iron
aggro
Beak
decks
Owl
play
or
demon
something.
fire. Yeah.
Like,
There are still ways around it, but it can be good.
it was really funny when it did happen, though. Now, on to the next card, and before anyone says anything, the art for this and the entire card was designed by Moon. This is what happens when Moon has free reign on what goes on a card. Now, the reason there's a dog on it is because we were looking for art for Mind Freeze, and I don't know why, but it is almost impossible to find art for Mind Freeze.
Yeah, and then I just found this little cute dog, and I laughed my ass out of it. Sent it to Jotto. Jotto laughed his ass out of it, and then we ended up using it.
Using it because nothing else worked. We even used like a card from the WoW TCG called Mind Freeze, but the Hearthstone card like template pushed it up, so you just couldn't see it. It just looked like a really demented smiley face, and I'm not kidding.
Like a little reference to the Team Doggy House.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna leave Moon to explain this one because this was entirely his design.
Yeah, I really like this card because we have some interactions to avoid some hero powers already. Like we have freeze. Freeze helps against rogues and against druids to avoid their hero power. Like not completely, but they don't get the full use out of it.
We'll just read the
So
text
I thought.
first.
Oh, okay. Your opponent. Yeah, it's a 1 mana spell. It's a cantrip spell, so you draw a card out of it. Your opponent cannot use their hero power next turn. Draw a card. So I thought Death Knight would be a class that kind of wants to disrupt something and lower the stats, which we will actually come to a card later on that lower stats. 2 cards actually that lower stats. And with this card you could disrupt their hero power, so I thought this could be really cool to have a cantrip spell disrupting the enemy hero power for the next turn. I really like this card, really like the idea. Yep. And suddenly everyone liked it.
Including the dog.
Including the dog.
It's the doggy house reference. I swear, if anyone can find any art for this that's actually legitimately good, please link it, because we tried. Could not find anything. Anyway, on to the next card. Now, this is a reference to Shiv, because in Teamspeak, we all have private rooms for certain things. Like, at the moment, we're currently recording this in my streaming room. And mine is called Jotto and his owl, because Iron Beak Owl reference. But Shiv's is called Shiv's Torture Chamber. And this came from Shiv. So yeah, 1 mana, give a minion -2 attack, -1 health. Now this is permanent and can be silenced. It is a buff effect, so to speak.
Right.
It is actually a buff effect, and it can be removed. But
I really like it. It implements a whole new mechanic, so
yeah, and it's not even that confusing.
pretty good.
Like, we have minus attack on other things like Elder Peacekeeper.
Right.
So we actually thought this would sort of have a necessary part in the actual game, but this used to be -1/-1. It was terrible. We made it -2/-1, and it turned amazing. It shuts down Harvest Golem, Keeper of the Grove, Ysera. If you silence it, normally you have to deal with a 4/12. Now it is a 2/11. That is not threatening in any way. Even things like Ancient of War becomes a 3/9. Or Chillwind
It's just
Yeti.
a really good card. And
Chillwind
because
Yeti.
the effect is and because the effect is so good, we could not make it a cantrip card. That would be too powerful.
This was insane. This is like Arcane Shot essentially for the class, but actually better, I think. Like, better in some situations, worse in others. So yeah, we couldn't put cantrip on this, even though originally it did have it on it. It was just too powerful.
I
Right.
really like this card.
On
One of my
to
favorite spells.
yeah, it wasn't for a while, but we finally made it decent. Now on to the Death Coil Drain Life thing. Now the reason this has art from Mortal Coil is because Mortal Coil used to be called Death Coil. So it's like the unfinished name, and the art is the unfinished art, so I thought I was being clever. Anyway, 2 mana, Death Coil. Deal 2 damage. If you control an undead, this is the first of the undead synergy cards that we like to call them. If you control an undead, you drain life, essentially. You deal 2 damage and restore 2 health to your hero. It's drain life for 2 mana, but only if you have an undead. If you don't have an undead, it's a 2 mana arcane shot, which is terrible.
Right. It's kind of in the same category as Minfire.
Yeah. It's like, this kind of reminds me of Kill Command. It's like terrible for its
Or
mana
something
cost,
like that, yeah.
but if you have a beast, it's really good for its mana cost.
Right. It's a mix between Demon Fire and Kill Command,
Yeah,
I guess.
like it really is a mix between the two. And that was just one of the things that we thought was an interesting thing. This was one of the first cards we made, I think. First spell? One of the first
I think
spells.
so,
we made.
yeah.
This is something we really wanted to do with the Drain Life thing and the Undead, and this is actually what caused us to make Undead one of the key mechanics. Originally it was
Just a
Drain.
good early game removal spell.
Yeah, it was really good. Okay, on to Rune Tap, a card that used to be terrible.
Terrible,
Now,
yeah.
currently, Rune Tap is 3 mana, destroy a friendly undead minion, draw 3 cards. This used to be destroy an undead minion, draw 2 cards for 2 mana. Now the problem with this, it had many problems with this. First of all, we made the hero undead, and it used to say character, so we made it undead minion. That was the first problem we had with this, because otherwise it was whoever drew the Rune Tap won. And then we had this other weird interaction, which was you could sacrifice your opponent's stuff and draw cards. This would happen a lot with Sylvanas, by the way.
Not powerful at all.
It was play Banshee, silence it, kill it, draw 2 cards. It was just like it was a big issue. Or I think the actual we realized this was a problem when Moon used it to kill my instructor Vesuvius. That was fun. But anyway, so that was the first problem. Well, second problem technically. Third problem was you were punished for targeting your own stuff because you had to work really hard to draw cards out of this without just saying I invest 2 cards and I get 2 cards. It was like a really bad cantrip. It was just not good. Like you had to have Skeletal Warlord on the board to get value out of it. It just wasn't good. And this is before we made Fellwalker. You couldn't even sacrifice your Fellwalker to get like a 2/2 out of it. No, you have to actually kill a minion. It was terrible. And then we ended up upping it to 3 mana and draw 3 cards. So at this point it's like Arcane Intellect, so to speak, in terms of how many cards, but you see more cards, but you have to sacrifice some of your board position, but then you can use it on tokens that you get, say skeleton tokens, and it was interesting. It was actually went from unplayable.
Or after you silence or something, you don't really need the 1/2 that much. Is it actually undead? I'm not sure.
Yes, it is.
It is. Yeah, it is.
You don't need the 1/2 to sacrifice it, draw 3.
Right.
This became quite strong. It went from unplayable to very strong. But not in every deck, and the main reason was because we had other cantrips on other spells, and also Pillar of Blight decks didn't really need it, but then some of the more aggressive decks would play this over Pillar of Blight because Pillar of Blight was too defensive.
Yeah, but it's good to have cards that are not in like every deck, that are like archetype focused, and most decks would probably play just a one-off of this card. Even though it might fit their deck, I think a one-off is enough.
I agree. Now, on to this is my creation. Now, this was one of the last cards we ever made. Black Bolt. This actually replaced another card in the set, which was really bad.
Yeah.
It was like Bane of Doom, but for undead.
The art ended up really good, but we actually searched for it like half an hour or something.
Yeah, we had a lot of issues with this, and fortunately for the 2 of us, I played Magic for years, so I actually know which cards to look for.
Still took half an hour.
It still took half an hour, yeah, but we eventually came up with something. But anyway, 4 mana, Black Bolt. Deal 4 damage. If the minion dies, draw a card. Now, that sounds weird, but I did not know how to template this, because I have a feeling that Mortal Coil used to be deal 1 damage, not deal 1 damage to a minion, but then they didn't want to template it, so they made it minion. That's my theory, at least, because I tried to template it, and I couldn't. But anyway, so it's a 4 damage Mortal Coil that can also target your opponent.
Yep.
That is why it's
basically
epic. Like,
that's why it's epic.
Like, forget 5 fireballs, 5 black bolts in arena. Have fun. Like, you can't do anything.
Would be insane.
It's like you play your cult master. Okay, draw a card. Like, yeah, it's really.
It's a really good card.
And with spell power, you kill a fire elemental and draw a card. You actually don't get 2 for 1 by a fire elemental if you have a blood mage with this thing.
Yeah.
It was
I
really
think
good.
this actually makes spell power interesting with a Black Knight.
Or Death Knight, yeah, but there's
Death Knight. Black Knight.
There's very few spell damage affected spells in this actual deck, because a lot of them aren't damage based, they're sort of effect based, like Torture Chamber, for example.
There are 3, I think.
There's Death Coil, Black Bolt, Breath of the Frostworm, which we will
Breath of
see,
the Frostworm.
and I think that might be it, actually. I don't think there are any other spells that benefit from spell damage.
I think it's still worth to put a Blood Mage in though.
Oh yeah. Cantrip, and you get your 5 damage Black Bolts and your 3 damage, like,
Yep.
Death Coils. Yeah, definitely. But this was a very, very powerful card, and this ended up replacing the bad Bane of Doom, essentially, which I never thought I'd say, because Bane of Doom is terrible, in the epic slot, which is why it was originally epic. I think actually it was originally rare. I mean, moved it up to epic because of arena.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this card was very, very strong. We did actually play a little bit with it, not as much as some of the other stuff, but this card was very strong in the end. And it sort of came in a little gap we had problems with, where things between 3 and 5 health were very difficult to deal with, but not things above or below that.
Right. I think it's a bit stronger than the hammer of the paladin.
Yeah.
But you actually have to kill something to get the benefit.
You can't just randomly target things and draw.
Yeah, you can't just randomly target the hero and draw a card, basically.
Exactly, and also
you
still
can with the Black Bolt.
equality.
You can still use it as a
Direct.
as a direct damage a spell to give some reach, but you don't draw a card out of it.
Yeah, that was the point. Okay.
I like it.
Breath of the Frostworm. Also known as the card which we could never decide whether it was good or not. We had some serious difficulties trying to figure out how to balance this, so we decided to not balance it in the end. It started at 5 mana, and then went to 7, and then went to 6, and then went to 6 damage, and then went to 4. We just left it at 6/5 at one point. We just gave up.
I think you can really well compare it to Holy Fire.
Yeah, it is. It's like Holy Fire. This is the Death
I
Knight Holy
like it.
Fire. The freeze feels like it's kind of unnecessary, since most of the time you're going to kill it, but not if it's something like a Zera.
Like a giant.
Or a giant, yeah. And also, you can freeze your opponent.
Right.
Direct damage that stops his weapons. So the freeze was surprisingly irrelevant, and that's why we had so much problem. That's why we had so many trouble, like, balancing this card, because the freeze was like, if the damage was too high, the freeze did nothing. But if the damage was too low, the damage didn't really do much, and the freeze did, and it just felt like a really awkward frostbolt.
I think it's fine as it is.
Yeah.
I mean, people can let us know, but I think it is really good.
I think this was fine in the end. It wasn't like a must-play spell, but it was okay as a one-off in some decks.
Yeah.
Kind of like Holy Fire. Okay, on to a card which was insanely overpowered when we first designed it. This used to be 5 mana. Give
5
all
mana.
enemy minions -2 attack and -2 health. Now, we quickly made this 6 mana because at 5 mana we realized you could do stupid things like make a 4/5 into a 2/3, or make a Harvest
Right.
Golem into a 1/0 that could never die because it can't attack anymore. Just random stuff like that. Or I think my personal favorite use was when I was actually winning and I had lethal on the board, and he epidemicked me twice. I just couldn't do any damage. I had a bunch of 0/1s on the board. It was just ridiculous.
It's in some cases a better AoE and in some cases a worse AoE. So it's
At 6
I
mana,
think it's pretty good.
again, the reason this is epic, like, is because, like, actually, wait a second, didn't we change this to rare? I feel like I made another mistake here.
Not entirely sure. You might have changed it to rare.
I think I changed this to rare when I made it 6 mana.
We can look it up and post it in the comment section or something.
I'm pretty sure it's a rare because I can see 3 other epics in here.
Okay, let's say it's a rare, and if it's not a rare, we can just post it in the comment section.
Yeah, it's a rare. I just counted all the rares. It is in fact a rare.
Okay.
Wow, we actually managed to make 3 different mistypes on card designs. That's impressive. Anyway, this is actually a rare and an epic, so ignore the little purple gem thing over here. But yeah, that is actually a rare, and I think the original version was epic though. The original version was epic, and that was 5 mana. And the reason that was epic was because you do not want people getting, like, if you think 4 flame strikes in arena is unfair, just wait until you actually can't play any minions because you have 7 things with 0 attack on your board. And that would happen. It would actually happen.
It could happen, yeah.
Because most things...
And we are not in Soulforge where you can just replace stuff.
Yeah, you can't. Like, 7 minions? No, you're not playing anything ever again. And I'm not going to kill them for you. But, yeah, so that was why it was originally epic. I think at 6 mana, though, we changed it to rare simply because if it's 6 mana, it's not as powerful, and you need to get them earlier on. You don't want to have your main AoE be impossible to craft and also not get them in arena ever.
And knowing Epidemic exists, you can also play around that. Like, you don't put 7 minions on the board randomly that has like
low attack.
with all 2 attack or something. So
yeah, although this was kind of hilarious against Murlocs.
yeah,
it would just kill all of them. Like, it would kill all of them and then make the war leader into a 1/1. It just, yeah, it did really well against Murlocs, and also against the old Blood Imp before it was changed. It was really good against the old Blood Imp, as most AoEs were, but it also reduced the damage output coming in. It was just a really strong AoE, but I think Blizzard, both the company and the card, showed us that AoEs for 5 mana have to be much, much weaker. And the actual card Blizzard was too strong, and that had a similar kind of effect. The freeze is very similar to the -2 attack.
exactly.
So yeah, this ended up being 6. On to Assassinate slash, like...
Siphon Sower.
Yeah, slash Crypt Fiend slash Drain Life slash... Anyway. So 6 mana, destroy a minion. It's the obligatory removal spell.
Right.
6
the hard
mana,
removal of the class.
Yeah, 6 mana, destroy a minion. So it's worse than Assassinate in that regard. But if you control an undead, you drain 2, which is insane. Just want to point out how ridiculous that is. Draining 2, 4
Draining
life
2 is
swing.
really good.
4 life swing, and you kill something.
Yeah.
And then because
it's like
you had
it reminds me, the whole drain mechanic reminds me of the old druid decks in Cockatrice, where you had like all druids were playing bites and stuff.
Yeah.
To burst you down. It reminds me of that time.
Just not that overpowered. Yeah, the old druids were crazy. I'm probably gonna make a video on the old druids at some point. But anyway, so Death's Embrace played a lot better than it looked. We thought at one point that this would be really, really awkward at 6 mana if you didn't have an undead, for example. But then we discovered that even if you don't have an undead, you're still gonna play the equivalent Siphon Soul.
Right.
Like, sure. Also,
Just really good.
you could use it on your own minions to get some direct damage and heal up a bit, kind of like with Siphon Soul with the healing.
Yeah, I guess in a control deck it could work.
Yep, it was actually a fairly decent spell. It's one of those things where we expected it to be a little bit too weak or a little bit too strong, depending on whether you were winning or not, but it actually turned out to be somewhere in the middle. Now, on to Shiv's other card that he fully designed. This is Shadow Madness, that affects anything.
Yep, anything.
And you make it undead.
Infect anything.
You make it undead until the end of turn, so you benefit from your road spells. This is another one of those cards where people are like, "Go home, Jotto, you're drunk." But
you could even steal a Ragnaros, right? You would get the Ragnaros trigger and then it goes back.
Yeah, because the Ragnaros was played first. But yeah, Dark Influence. Now, the main reason we made this card was to give some way of punishing those big minion decks.
Right.
Like, stealing a Ysera, getting a Dream card, and trading with something is fairly devastating.
Or even Giant.
Or a Giant. Like, steal a Giant, deal 8 damage to the face. Like, most Warlocks
this card
can't
might
take that.
be as good that we actually might have to up it a bit. I'm not sure yet.
In practice, I don't think it was. It feels
it wasn't in practice, yeah, that's true.
You know what it feels like? The old mind control. Where people kept complaining about it, but then no one actually realized the card wasn't that overpowered, and then it got changed to 10 mana, and was like, oh my god, the card is like balanced now. And then no one ever played mind control again.
It comes back a bit, but people only play like one-off, yeah.
Once a month.
And only Ducking Face?
Yep. But yeah, it kind of feels like the old mind control, where this looks incredibly overpowered, but then you realize 6 mana is a lot. And with the current metagame, like, and not to mention, you can't just use this to direct damage and kill the other guy. The class isn't aggressive enough to pull that off.
Right.
It's much more mid-rangey in feel as opposed to aggro. Like, you need to work to get your aggro deck to work. And I realize
you're not just throwing your minions out there like a warlock. Okay.
Yep. Anyway, so that's the end of the spells. Onto the 2 weapons. Now, the first weapon is one which started as a rare, I do believe. Soul Sword. 2 mana.
I think so, yeah.
2 mana 2/2 weapon, so it's like the standard thing. You have the 2 mana 3/2, that's vanilla, and then you have the 2 mana 2/3 with Overload. But whenever you kill a minion with your hero, drain 1.
This was very relevant.
Yeah, this was...
Especially with Pillar.
This was mini True Silver.
Yeah.
Like, really mini True Silver.
Mini True Silver, and you might get a benefit out of a Pillar or something.
Yep. I mean, Soul Sword... I remember when Pillar was 1 mana, and this actually happened to me, where I had a really slow hand and I couldn't remove them, and Moon he was going second, so I went turn 1 zombie, and he went turn 1 double Pillar of Blight, turn 2 Soul Sword, kill my zombie, draw 2 cards. This is one of the other reasons Pillar was nerfed.
That was ridiculous, yeah.
But it came up all the time, to the point when we actually started playing Oozes. Because this thing was way stronger than it looked. And it wasn't strong to the point of being overpowered, but it was strong kind of like Fiery War Axe is strong. Where you're gonna ooze it if you get the opportunity, but it's not the end of the game if you don't. So this turned out to be a lot better than it looks again. Drain was a lot more powerful than it looks on the tin, which is why it was such an interesting mechanic to play with, especially.
Mm-hmm.
And this was surprisingly powerful. The other thing was you played this early, and True Silver, one of the problems is you're in full life, you heal and then you attack. This, you attack and then you heal. Didn't come up very much, but every so often it did, because your hero power also drained. So you just attack, maybe hero power, draw a card off your pillar, draw another card off your pillar, and then just like heal 2 life back up, and it was essentially True Silver at that point. It was a very strong card that had a lot of synergies with some of the earlier drops. And was, I think, one of your favorite cards to play, if I recall.
It was, yeah. I had the 2 off in every deck, basically.
Yeah, I
really like this one.
I had one deck without it, because I had a lot of earlier drops. but then I instantly regretted it and put in 1. But yeah, it felt like Fiery War Axe, like a 1 or 2
Yep.
of in most decks. Now, on to the final card. Dun, dun, dun. Now, this could have been Shadowmourne, but then we realized everyone has done Shadowmourne. Like,
Yeah.
everyone. Every single Death Knight set we've ever seen has Shadowmourne as a card. So, no. We are doing Greatsword of the Ebon Blade. And this started off as being terrible. It was a 2-2. 2-2s
Yep.
are terrible when it comes to weapons. Yeah.
Unless it's an early weapon with
another
with
effect.
the source on.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, this is 5 mana 3-2, Battlecry, destroy an enemy Mana Crystal. No, that's supposed to be Mana Crystal. 4th typo. Wow. That's incredible, man. 4th typo? Whatever. I'm making up for my last video when I didn't make any. But yeah. So 5 mana 3-2 weapon, Battlecry, destroy an enemy Mana Crystal. It's like anti-Wild Growth. Now, this was originally, until he decided to tell us, Moon originally decided to think, oh, the effect isn't strong enough, let's make it whenever it attacks. To which I pointed out, Captain Greenskin is a card.
It was too strong.
It was like
destroying a mana crystal is very relevant, especially in late game. Like if let's say you kill a arching commander with this weapon, then he's at 5 mana again, maybe.
And he
So
goes back up to 6, and then he can't play his Ancient of War, for example.
Right.
It
Stuff
was
like that.
surprisingly irrelevant. The other thing was the original weapon. The problem we had with it was you could chain them. So you went Greatsword of the Ebon Blade on turn 4 with coin, attack. They go to 4 mana again, and then in your turn you go up to 5. You play Greenskin, attack. They go down to 4 again, and then you could keep this up for 5 turns. And then with Youthful Brewmasters, you could keep up for 8 turns. They never ever did anything. That's why that was. That's why that was changed.
Greenskin is actually quite good for Death Knight still.
Yeah.
You can try it.
4-3 and also a 3-3 Soul Sword was fairly relevant. But the actual just Battlecry, just destroying 1 mana crystal is surprisingly strong. Even like you're paying essentially 3 mana to do so.
Essentially,
if you look at Fiery War Axe, you're paying 3 mana to destroy an enemy mana crystal. That's how we sort of evaluated it in the end, and it turned out to be okay. It wasn't overpowered, it just was a bit of a tempo mess up, especially if your opponent was trying to curve out. They just have a weird turn where they couldn't do anything. Because people would set up their hands to go like 4-5-6, and then their turns would actually be 4-5-5. And they just got messed up by things. It didn't work against Druid though, because they just went, instead of
innovate.
Instead of 4-5-8, they just went 4-5-7. And they were still powering out the things with Innervate, but against most classes it was very, very notable, especially against some of the later decks, especially the Mage decks. Mage had a lot of mana curve issues with this.
Yeah.
Like
Flame Strike comes a turn later and stuff like
Pyroblast
that.
comes a turn later. Like there's a lot of synergies, so you can't just freeze a Death Knight board continuously. You actually have to kill it, because otherwise all that they do is like, oh, you froze my minions again. I'll rune tap my zombie, drain 2 different life, draw 2 different cards from my pillar, draw another 3 from the Rune Blight, and then continue to set up on you to eventually die.
Yep.
You can't freeze a Death Knight board that's being minion focused. It doesn't work. So mages had a bit of issues against that unless they had the Flame Strike, and Greatsword would sort of hold off the Flame Strike for a bit. So the card turned out to be a lot better than it actually looked. Because Battlecry, destroy an enemy mana crystal, does not look that strong, but then you have to realize why Wild Growth is good. Like that is sort of the principle, and that is why it costed so much. We did not want the anti-Wild Growth on turn 2.
And it's also we're also implementing a new effect, right? There's no effect destroying a mana crystal.
Yeah, there's no
currently.
effect.
There's overload, kind of, like for the next turn, but
no actual destruction of mana crystals.
It's no actual destruction, so.
Yep. But anyway, thank you all for watching. There's been a video which has been in the works for a very long time, and it was good to finally put this out sort of to the public, since we've both put a lot of work into it, especially today when we were doing all the images and templating and such. We've been working on this for quite a while, on and off.
Really happy we got it finished.
Yeah, really happy we got this out there, especially in video format. Most people have not been doing it in video format, just putting out an article about it. But the problem with doing that is, while it's easier to actually reference, you don't get any of the explanations as to why the cards do what they do, so it's very, very easy to misunderstand what certain cards do, and you get wording complications and things like that.
Right.
So as far as I know, I don't think there are any other Death Knight sets video-based.
Video-based? Probably not.
If there are any, then like message me. Message me on YouTube, or put it in the comments, and I'll go check it out. But anyway, thank you all for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe. If you have any feedback on the actual set, or just want to rage at me for making a couple of cards which people don't agree with, probably Gargoyle's going to come back to bite me out a couple of times. But anyway, if you have any feedback in that, just say so.
And thanks for watching. Thanks, Jotto, for inviting me to the show. And I think we are all really excited what Blizzard actually will come up with the upcoming classes. I hope they get some ideas out of the community, mainly from us. But pretty excited.
Now on to the Monk project. No, that's not going to happen for a couple of months. Don't. Just no. I'm not doing a Monk project until I feel motivated to do a Monk project. Soon, trademark. Anyway, this has been Jotto and Moon, signing off.